Israel and Palestine have always been religiously tied to Judaism, Islam, and Christianity. However, for many years, the Holy Land has been searching for peace in the midst of a seemingly endless conflict. And it all began with Britain. Britain's role with the Arab Palestinians began when Sir Henry McMahon, British High Commissioner of Egypt, wrote to the Sharif Hussein of Mecca in 1915. In this correspondence, McMahon said, on behalf of the British government, that Britain would support Arab independence from the Ottoman Empire, only excluding areas that cannot be said to be purely Arab. The Arabs were content with this agreement and regarded it as a promise that the end of Ottoman rule would allow Arab lands, such as Palestine, to become an Arab nation. This became known as the McMahon Agreement. Arabs would later revolt against and help defeat the Ottomans in World War I because of this agreement. At the same time, Europe was experiencing a rise in anti-Semitic hatred. Examples of this, such as the Dreyfus Affair and Russian pogroms, made people believe that the Jews would not be safe from anti-Semitism until a Jewish state was created in Palestine, the biblical land of Israel, where the Jewish religion claims its origins. This political concept, called Zionism, gained popularity by World War I. The war began with Britain at a disadvantage because Germany, their enemy, had control of producing acetone, an ingredient used in producing arms. But things turned in favor of the Allied powers when British scientist Chaim Weizmann invented a fermentation process of liquid acetone. Because of this help to the British war effort, Weizmann was introduced to British Foreign Secretary Arthur Balfour and British Prime Minister David Lloyd George. Weizmann was not only a scientist, but also a leader in the Zionist movement. He asked that the British government help him in achieving his Zionist goals. Lloyd George and Balfour were willing to help the Zionists, not only because of Weizmann and a genuine belief in the righteousness of the cause, but also because they, as representatives of the British government, hoped that public support of Zionism would lead to other countries joining the war, such as the United States. Eventually, the Balfour Declaration was written on November 2, 1917, a letter written by Balfour to Lord Rothschild, a prominent Zionist and friend of Chaim Weizmann. The letter quoted the decision of the British cabinet, saying, "His Majesty's government view with favor the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people, and will use their best endeavors to facilitate the achievement of this object." This statement was the first recognition by a world power of the Jewish people's desire to return to the sacred land of Israel and establish a Jewish homeland there. All around the world, the Jews rejoiced. A week after the declaration was approved, an editorial in the Jewish Chronicle read, "With one step, the Jewish cause has made a great bound forward, a new epoch for our race. Amidst all that is so dark and dismal and tragic throughout the world, there has thus arisen for the Jews a great light. It is the perceptible lifting of the cloud of centuries, the palpable sign that the Jew, condemned for 2,000 years to unparalleled wrong, is at last coming to his right." The Balfour Declaration reinforced the hopes of the Jewish people in returning to the Holy Land they had been exiled from thousands of years before. Britain's statement of sympathy with the Zionist movement led to an increased Jewish immigration into Palestine. Because of this, a conflict would emerge because immigration prevented Arab independence and instead gave rise to a Jewish nation. The end of World War I concluded nearly 400 years of Ottoman rule in Palestine. Britain came to control it when the League of Nations granted Britain a mandate on the land on the basis of the terms of the Balfour Declaration. In 1921, Britain made east of the Jordan River Transjordan and the west the Palestine Mandate. The Arabs were not happy about this, since they wanted to have an Arab nation after they helped defeat the Ottoman Empire. In March of 1921, the Arab-Palestine Congress wrote to Winston Churchill, Britain's colonial secretary. They said, "Palestine, one of our most sacred lands, has been isolated for a thought-out purpose, and this has been the reward of the Allies to the Arabs for their fidelity and blood they sacrificed." The Arabs were upset over Britain's promise to make Palestine a Jewish homeland, and that Britain had assumed control of Palestine after World War I. They thought they would be granted the land as an Arab nation, as the McMahon Agreement seemed to say. Britain, however, stuck to the Balfour Declaration as justification for Jewish immigration into Palestine and continued to control the land. Increasing tensions caused the first clashes of the conflict in 1921, when Palestinians saw their land being stripped away from them. These were the first of fights that would continue for years to come. Nazi genocidal policies in Europe and the creation of concentration camps during the Holocaust created more discomfort for both the Jews and the Arabs. From 1932 to 1945, an additional 283,800 Jews flooded into Palestine, doubling the Jewish population, in an attempt to escape the horrors of persecution. Arab leaders saw this as a threat to their community's lifestyle. Jews and Arabs resorted to violence in Palestine because of their desires to control it, especially without Britain.
They were targeting mainly the British and the Arabs, but mainly the British. The Jews wanted us out. In 1938, there was an uprising by the Arabs. It was called the War of the Black Triangle. The Arabs had a rising because they could fear that the Jewish immigration was beginning to take over, getting into position.
And so, Britain found themselves in the middle of a conflict they could not control. Not only were the Palestinians and Jews fighting each other, they fought the British as well. Britain turned to the United Nations for help. The newly founded UN in 1947 proposed a partition plan in which Palestine was divided into an Arab state, Palestine, and into a Jewish state, Israel. While the Jews accepted the plan, the Arabs rejected it. Britain finally decided to end its mandate on Palestine on May 14, 1948. On the same day, the Jews announced their independence, announcing the new state of Israel. In response, surrounding Arab countries attacked. With advantages in the Israeli army, Israel won, and the war ended with the 1949 armistice agreements, in which Israel and its neighboring countries recognized their borders. Palestine became the West Bank in Gaza, and today some parts of the West Bank are still occupied by Israel. The War of 1948 is known by Palestinians as Al-Nakba, or the catastrophe, because as many as 750,000 Palestinians fled or were forced off their land and became refugees. Refugee camps were set up in neighboring Arab states, but these came under Israeli control in 1967. Since 1948, the land has experienced very little amount of peace. Israeli presence and control in Palestinian territories has been the main reason for terrorist attacks. Attempts at peace talks have been made, but with little success. Today, Israel governs both Israel and Palestine. Checkpoints and roadblocks affect civilians daily as they limit movement in the land. Palestinians and Israelis live separate from each other, living completely different lives, even though they live on the same land. Exposure to occasional war has psychologically scarred Palestinian and Israeli children because of their many nightmares. Even most of Palestinian water supply is controlled by Israel. Peace for the Israeli-Palestinian conflict depends on the negotiations between the two sides. Possible solutions include a one-state solution in which Palestinians and Israelis live amongst each other peacefully, or a two-state solution in which Israel and Palestine live in their own separate states. Going back all the way to the early 20th century, Britain's leadership during World War I can be said to have paved the way for the conflict between the Israelis and the Palestinians. Then what seemed like a good idea turned into violence the British could not control, giving up their leadership in Palestine but unable to stop the clashes that happened afterward and still happen to this day.